A continuación es el turno de...
Now it's the turn of Pablo Requena, who will talk about a question in his intervention. Is NRF the Catholic contraceptive?
Muy buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank for this invitation, Dr. Chiva for this invitation and the rest of the organizers. And congratulate for the organization of this seminar that I believe is of utmost importance at many levels. It has been repeated more than once, but it's good to realize the importance of gathering, meeting to talk about and think about all these topics. I apologize for having to read somewhat my presentation. The blame is, well, I have to blame Dr. Chiva for asking me this question and giving me only 20 minutes to answer it. But I'm going to try to do it and to say something at least. This is the scheme that I would like to follow in my talk in this session. And the answer is very simple. From the ethical point of view, it wouldn't be equivalent, the contraception and periodical abstinence seen because they have the same goal or aim, or is it just an issue of method in order to reach the same goal? Or, with the question of Dr. Chiva, isn't the national recognition of fertility the Catholic contraceptive? What I try to show in my thesis is that contraception and periodical abstinence are difficult. It's difficult to compare them from the perspective of the theory of action, and the ethical framework where these two options are placed are completely different. The second follows the context of the virtue of conjugal chastity, and the first one is guided by the technical efficacy that is darkened, the personal love act that belongs to the union between the partners in a couple. I would like to refer to a thesis that has just been finished at the University of La Santa Cruz. Don Juan Prieto has done this work. It hasn't yet been discussed, but I have used it in order to prepare my session as well. We start with the first item, very briefly so, because it has already been mentioned in the previous sessions. The difficulty to treat today about the conjugal moral, and also in the setting of the Catholic Church. And I believe that apart from reminding you everything that has been said as concerning the sexual revolution, I believe it is very important to consider how this revolution, 1968, and the ideas that it had with it shaped the thought of not many theorists in the Church, in the Catholic Church. And we see that today in many things that we can see in the newspaper that are sometimes are positive, and also amongst others, other manifestations in the lack of capability of many Christians today to understand to be the celibate, to be single. I believe that at the end, these ideas were being created during many decades, and that did burst, so to speak, in 1968. I believe that these words of Benedict XVI from 3 years ago, talking about the church and all the abuse in the church, define the problem. It's a problem that we have and that we will have for a while as well, I believe. And in the years of the sexual revolution, We also have a very important event in the Catholic Church, the Second Concile, and the renewal of the moral theology that gave very good fruits, as pointed out by the Concile, with a greater use of the sources of the sacred texts in order to make this moral, but look for other ways of justifying the moral duty that not always agreed with the Catholic moral tradition. Some currents did arise, as the autonomous morale, and the others of proportionalism and consequentialism that also have to do with the topic of today, because they were quite linked with the contestation to the encyclic Humane Vitae of John Paul VI. All these issues that would be difficult to summarize in a few lines entailed the publication in 1993 of this encyclic of Juan Pablo II, Veritatis Splendor, in which they give an answer to these problems and other associated to the fundamental moral theory. If we have to wonder or to answer the question if the natural recognition of fertility is the Catholic contraceptive, we have to first see what the Catholic Church says about all these issues. So here you will have to trust me, because if we have to review the Church from Pio XI to the Pope Franciscus, we would need 20 minutes more. So if you trust me and you accept these two elements that I believe go through this whole magistry. The first one is that periodic abstinence based on the recognition of fertility is morally legal when there are serious reasons for it. And the second one, that contraception, as all act that wants to make sterile the union between the couple, is immoral and different from the periodical abstinence. As to the ethical justification of the limiting births, just say very briefly that both contraception and resorting to natural recognition of fertility is looking to, as we can see in some cases, to prevent or to postpone new births. And here we have the whole issue of the moral justification of that goal before entering to value the means used to do that. Maybe now it's so obvious that for many people, many couples, it's hard to bring about all these children that they would have had spontaneously, where they don't think about any type of limitation. But this has not always been like that. In fact, in the Catholic setting, the expression responsible fatherhood is not very old. Until the Castigum Nubi from Pius XI, it was not too clear that the Christian partners, couples had to think about how many they wanted and could have. Resorting to periodical abstinence was seen as, in what they said in 1888, as something to be tolerated under some circumstances, and not, as we see now, as a manifestation of the virtue of conjugal chastity. The social setting has changed given the configuration of the modern family, especially in the cities, and the work of women outside the home makes more difficult the possibility of having a big family. The phenomenon is complex and could be analyzed from many different points of view. The Church realizes that difficulty and tries to help explaining the Christian families that it is good that the generation for children is something that they have to think about. An example among many of this doctrine, we can see this in this text from the Pope Franciscus in Amoris Laetitia. And we now go over to the two items or topics that are most important in my presentation. The first one refers to the phenomenological approach of the different settings that we are comparing here, and the second one that refers to the theory of action. Those two options, considered superficially, could seem two different modes of doing the same thing. This year we are in a jubileum or a year of Santiago, and there are many ways of reaching the tomb of the apostle in Santiago. And we could think that contraception as well, or the fact of resorting to the natural methods, are also two different ways to obtain the same goal. This is the perception that we can see in the implementation of some applications for the mobile phones that consider its proposal based on the measurement of the baseline temperature as one more contraceptive method. But when we observe these two options more carefully, and especially when we say choose periodical abstinence, we realize that they are completely different. From a methodological, phenomenological point of view, we see significant differences in how to prevent births. The couple that chooses a contraceptive medium plays the problem in a technical plays the question in a medical problem, and for which there is a technical solution that can be the contraceptive pill or a condom. In the first case, the condom, the responsibility of the method falls on the male part of the couple. In the second one, in the case of the pill, it's supporting on the women. At any rate, it's always the woman that runs a greater risk, the risk of the so-called non-desired pregnancy. Although it's minor with the use of the hormonal contraceptives than with the use of condoms, we shouldn't forget in the phenomenological analysis, as has been said before, all the risks associated for the health of the woman linked to the use of the pill. Right now, we can't stop into depth and go into depth, but they have already been mentioned. But on the other side, the NRF places the question not on the technical plane, but a personal plane. It's not a technical issue for which it's enough with a technical answer, but the technical natural method doesn't do anything. It only informs and about the possible fertility of the woman at a given point in time. And it is that information that is demanding a high involvement of both parts of the couple that have decided to distance their pregnancies. Contrarily to the use of contraceptive, the NRF requires from the couple a certain mastering of the sexual drive. This element that is part of the virtue of the conjugal life offers to both the possibility of finding other ways of showing their love, as one said before. Unlike the contraception, the natural recognition of fertility can be a path for the education of the sensitivity and a better harmonization of the natural strengths that are not at the mercy of the hormonal levels, but that are integrated within the goods of the person. What I've said until now doesn't mean that the NRF means automatically the virtue as harmonization and education of the effective part of the person with respect to the goal of the sexuality and the end of life as a whole. We can use the NRF with a more mentality that has to do more with continence than with virtue. But certainly it's an option that facilitates virtue. And the difference between chastity as a virtue and continence is exactly in the fact that the first one is ordering the sensitivity, guiding it towards the good of the self given to the other person, using as well the bodily and affective dimension at the service of the interpersonal love, whilst continence is a half virtue The only thing it obtains is preventing the sexual act imposed by the will, but without obtaining any new order in the affective scale or realm. We could say as well that the use of contraception in the setting of the virtue of chastity in order to promote. One couldn't speculate the use of contraception in the setting of the virtue of chastity in order to promote the interpersonal love, to integrate the contraception as part of the virtue of chastity. But nevertheless, this possibility has no room because contraception goes against one of the essential dimensions of the love between the partners. And this is the topic of the last session. The last chapter. We have seen how contraception and periodical abstinence in the setting of natural recognition of fertility present with striking differences at the experience level. But we wonder if they are so different in the setting of the action. The issue is if they are really very different, considered as moral actions. Those two planes that doesn't seem to have anything to do with each other can be used so that we realize how different recognition airplane is. What it does, it just see how the situation is. It's so, and then a bombarding airplane that destroys everything that is underneath. Before facing this issue, we can already give a first negative answer to the question that is the goal of my session. Is NRF the Catholic contraceptive? No, it's not, due to the simple reason that the NRF can be used in order to prevent a pregnancy or in order to achieve it. But on the other hand, the condom or the pill will never facilitate a pregnancy. They are made just to prevent it. This confirms something that we've seen before. The natural recognition is informing about the degree of fertility, and the contraceptive acts preventing the possibility of conception. Valuing the morality of all these actions, we distinguish classically between the object of the action, the goal that is pursued, and the circumstances. And the moral tradition wants to consider an action good. It's not only the goal due to which we do that, but also the moral effect. What is done. It's another way of naming the basic intentionality of every action. For contraception, we find a specific definition of the moral object in number 14 of Humanae Vitae, when they say that is all action or in the conjugal act or in its performance or in the development of the natural consequences when one proposes as a goal or means to make impossible procreation. Because contraception is not doesn't consist in preventing to have procreation to take place, but in order to do something to prevent it. In fact, there are drugs that prevent procreation, but that they are not taken to prevent the procreation. And then I don't know if it's from the moral point of view contraception or if it's a medical treatment. What defines contraception is something that is done in order to prevent procreation in a freely chosen conjugal act. In the case of limitation of births through the natural recognition of fertility, it's harder to define the moral act because in reality there are many moral acts with many different moral objects. Periodical abstinence means to prevent sexual intercourse during the fertile period of the woman. But this, unlike the contraceptive act, is not a specific act, but just a decision that many other acts follow from. Whilst in the first case, that is what we could call an anti-procreation election, the second one, the election is non-procreative. it could seem to be something similar or quite similar, but the difference is striking. We can use an example to see this diversity. To give money to a beggar is good, but this is something that we should do from time to time. But not always that when somebody is asking for or begging, are we forced to give it. But what we should never do is to abuse the person who is asking money from us. Something similar is what happens with procreation. It's a good couple should be open to have children. But this doesn't mean that every conjugal act should pursue that goal. But nevertheless, what one shouldn't do is go against that good. We can end with a suggestion that has its root in the Aristotelic thought. If we really want to know the difference between contraception and periodical abstinence, the more direct way will be to ask a person who is virtuous, in this case, a couple who lives in conjugal chastity. Thank you very much.